Hey guys, this is Hemant from Edureka. Today's session is going to be all about Google Cloud and AWS. So we're going to discuss the differences between AWS and Google Cloud and also the things which are common between these two cloud providers. So let's move on to today's agenda to understand what all topics will be discussed today. So we'll start the session by discussing the different cloud providers which are out there in the market and then move to the topic of the day, which is AWS versus Google Cloud. After that, we'll be discussing the job trends, wherein we'll be discussing the job posting from both these cloud providers and see which provider has more jobs to offer. In the end, we'll pass the verdict as in which cloud provider is better than the other. Alright, so guys, this is our agenda for today. Are we clear with it? Right, so I'm getting confirmations. John says yes. Parvati says all clear. Binsu is clear as well. Okay guys, so since most of you guys are saying yes, let's move on and start with today's session. Now, since the cloud computing industry is such a big industry, it is bound to have competition. And hence we have a lot of cloud providers which are out there, right? And among these cloud providers, we have AWS, which is the leader among the cloud providers. So let's look at the other cloud providers. So we have Rackspace, we have DigitalOcean, we have IBM Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Join, Termark, VMware, etc. Right? Now among all these cloud providers, like I said, AWS is the leader in the leaderboard, right? Then we have Microsoft Azure in the second number, and then comes Google Cloud Platform. Now how do we know that AWS is ranked 1? So we know that based on the market share that they have. So if you talk about AWS, AWS has a share of 31% in the global cloud computing market share. If you compare it to Google Cloud, so Google Cloud has just 8%. And if you talk about Microsoft Azure, which is on number 2, it has a market share of around 11%. Now why is AWS's share the greater than all the other cloud providers? It is because AWS had a head start, right? So AWS was started way back in 2006 when there was no cloud competitor, right? Google Cloud, on the other hand, came in 2011, and hence it is taking time to cope up with AWS. But mind you guys, it is showing tremendous growth in whatever services it has launched till date. So obviously AWS has more number of services than Google Cloud because it was launched way earlier, and hence it is more mature to deliver these kind of services. But Google Cloud is also deploying services which are in line with AWS. But when it comes to the features, then AWS obviously has more features because it is more mature, right? So my point is that maybe Google Cloud has a share of 8% in the market right now. But in the near future, maybe 3 years or 4 years down the line, it may come in par with AWS and compete with AWS head on, right? So this was about the market share. Let's move on and see the other parameters that we'll be differentiating on today. So we'll be touching these domains. We'll be talking about the compute domain and be discussing the differences. We'll be talking about the storage domain, the databases domain, pricing, troubleshooting, and the downtime in the end, right? So let's start with the compute domain. So if you talk about the compute domain, so AWS has the following services. So we're not listing all these services, but we are keeping all the important services which are there in this domain, right? So if you talk about AWS, AWS has EC2, Elastic Beanstalk, and AWS Lambda. Now if you compare it with Google Cloud has launched similar services with different names. So if you're a person who uses EC2 in your AWS environment, and you want to launch an instance in, say, the Google Cloud, right? So you'd be using the Cloud Engine application or service. Now, if you talk about the features or if you talk about the main working between EC2 and Cloud Engine, it is the same. You basically launch virtual machines in the cloud, right? You basically get a raw server and you are free to do anything with that server. But if you talk about the implementation time, like I said, AWS implements this same VM on a cloud machine in, say, minutes on its own infrastructure. Google Cloud does that in seconds, right? But like I said, it has, when we take AWS as a whole, so it has more features. These services in AWS can be interrelated, right? So you have all those capabilities, but Google Cloud is still in the development phase. Let's talk about the next service, which is Elastic Beanstalk. So Elastic Beanstalk is basically a platform as a service, right? So you get a platform wherein you can deploy your application. Now this same service has also been offered by Google Cloud. So it is called Apps Engine in case of Google Cloud, right? Now what exactly is platform as a service? So you are not dealing with the underlying hardware or with the underlying operating system. In case of EC2 or in case of Cloud Engine, you get an operating system and you work on it, right? But in case of Elastic Beanstalk or Apps Engine, in the case of Google Cloud, you don't get the access to the operating system. You just have an option to select the operating system, right? Once you do that, you'll prompted with a screen wherein you'll be uploading your code and your application will be deployed from there, right? You don't have to deal with the operating system, and that is what platform as a service is. Our next service is AWS Lambda, or if you talk about the service, it is the serverless computing service. So if we talk about the serverless computing service in AWS, it's called AWS Lambda. But in case of Google Cloud, the same exact service is called Cloud Functions. Now, what is this serverless architecture system? So in this architecture, basically you just upload your code and this code will be deployed onto servers. You don't have to choose which operating system you want to deploy or what configuration of server you want. Your code will be executed automatically based on the workload that you're getting or based on the processing power which is required to process your code, right? Now, it sounds exactly the same, Elastic Beanstalk and Lambda, right? But what is the difference? The difference is that in case of Lambda, you can just execute the background tasks. But like in case of Elastic Beanstalk, you can deploy applications, right? Now, if you talk about Google Cloud, it is the same. So Cloud Functions is used to run background tasks on a serverless architecture. The difference between your Cloud Functions and Apps Engine is that Apps Engine is used to deploy an application and Cloud Functions is used to execute background tasks, right? So guys, this was about the compute section. Any questions related to any of the service which we just discussed? Okay, so John says he's clear. So does Parvati. Pratika says she's clear. Harshita says she's clear. Okay guys, since most of you are clear, let's move on to the next domain, which is the storage domain, right? So let's discuss the services in AWS first. So we have the S3 service, which is basically an object-based file system, right? So you can store files on this file system and these files will be treated as objects. Now S3 has buckets, right? These buckets are basically the root folder, and inside this root folder, you can store your objects or your files. In case of Google Cloud, you have the cloud storage file system. The cloud storage file system is again an object-based file system. In cloud storage as well, you have buckets, which are nothing but the root folders, and you can store your files inside the cloud storage service. So the next service is Elastic Block Storage. Now, what is Elastic Block Storage? Elastic Block Storage is basically a hard drive in which each block acts as a separate hard drive. Now, EBS or Elastic Block Store is actually used with the compute services, that is EC2. Same is the case with persistent disk in your Google Cloud. So your persistent disk is again a block level storage wherein each block acts like a separate hard drive, and it is used with the compute instances that you use in your Google Cloud. Our next service is AWS Glacier, which is used to archive data, right? And similar service is offered in Google Cloud as well. That service is cloud storage, but under cloud storage, you have 3 storage classes. So let's discuss these storage classes. So there are basically 4 storage classes. You have multi-regional storage, you have regional storage, you have nearline storage, and you have cold line storage. So basically there are 4 storage classes. Now, cold line storage is the cheapest storage. Then comes nearline storage, which is a little expensive than cold line. Then you have regional storage, which is a little more expensive than nearline. And then you have multi-regional storage, which is the most expensive of the lot. Now the difference between all these storage classes is the availability, right? If you talk about multi-regional storage in case of Google Cloud, so it is 99.95% available. If we talk about regional storage, it is only 99.9% available. If you talk about nearline storage, it is 99% available, and cold line storage is 99% available, but it has the lowest cost among all of them. Now you would ask me, what is the difference between cold line storage and nearline storage, right? So the last two storage lines or the last 2 storage classes are different because they give different access time. So if you want to retrieve a file, so you can retrieve that file better in nearline storage or more faster in nearline storage than the cold line storage, which is the least expensive of the lot. Alright guys, so this brings us to our end of the storage classes. Any doubt in any of the services? Okay, since most of you are clear, let's move on. Next is the databases domain, under which we have the following services. So our first service is RDS. So we'll be comparing the service RDS with the SQL database, right? So RDS is a relational database service. It's a service that manages your database, all right? So what happens in case of RDS is you get an option to choose between 5 databases, and once you choose those databases, RDS manages those databases for you. So basically you can scale, you can take backups, you can frequently patch everything, so your security patches, your everything is done by RDS automatically, right? Now the service which is similar in case of Google Cloud is called the SQL database, but the only difference between RDS and the SQL database is that in case of SQL database, you don't have the option of choosing another database. You just have the option of using MySQL, right? So in case of RDS, you had 5 databases, right? You had PostgreSQL, you had SQL, you had Microsoft SQL, you had MySQL, you had Oracle, right? But in case of your SQL database, you don't have that option. In case of SQL database, you can only use the MySQL service or the MySQL database. Our next service is the Redshift service or the BigQuery service in case of Google Cloud. It is basically a data warehouse which is used for data analytics, and you can feed in data from your databases which are existing in your Google Cloud, which in case of Google Cloud Platform could be SQL database or Cloud Bigtable, or in case of AWS could be RDS and DynamoDB, right? So Redshift can take data from RDS and DynamoDB, and BigQuery can take data from SQL database and Cloud Bigtable. So it's a data analytics tool. Our next service is used for the NoSQL databases, right? So in case of AWS, it is called DynamoDB, and in case of Google Cloud Platform, it is called Cloud Bigtable. So over here, it is again a managed service. It manages your databases for you, and this service is used for managing your NoSQL database. Our next domain is the pricing domain. So let's see what all, so in this domain we'll be discussing the pricing differences between AWS and the Google Cloud, right? So let's start off with reserved instances in AWS first. So what are reserved instances? So basically you get logged on to AWS for a 1 year or 3 year term. And if you do that, if you select your configuration and you make an agreement with the company that you'll be using it for 1 year or a 3 year term, you get discounts up to 70%. If you compare it with a service, if you look for a service which is similar in case of Google Cloud, it will be committed use, right? It was recently announced on 9th of March by Google that it's a new payment option for using the Cloud Engine service. So what happens in committed uses, again like AWS, you get in a contract with Google for a 1 year or 3 year term, and you can save up to 57%. But the kind of pricing options that Google has, now comparing it with AWS, it was found that Google's pricing is much better than AWS. So if you compare AWS and Google Cloud, the pricing options, the kind of pricing that Google offers, if you go for a reserved instance kind of thing, wherein you have to reserve your computers or reserve your configuration for a 1 year or 3 year term, you get better returns in Google's environment than in AWS's, right? Now, where did I find this? I found this on RightScale. You can check for yourself as well. And then the other difference is that in case of your Google, you are actually buying in bulk memory and storage, right? You don't have to specify how many servers you need. You don't have to specify what configuration of servers you need. You just have to specify how much memory and how much storage you need, right? Once you purchase your memory and storage, you can divide these memory and storage among as many servers as you want in Google, right? So this is a good or this is a better plan from Google when you compare it for the AWS, and otherwise as well. You're getting better returns in terms of pricing when you use your committed use discounts in case of Google, right? A next option of pricing is your billing. How are you billed in AWS and how you billed in Google? So you're billed according to the hour in AWS, that you're charged per hour in AWS. But if you compare it with Google, so Google has a pricing option which is a per minute billing, all right? So you're billed according to the minute usage in case of Google Cloud. So in case of Google Cloud, you have a minimum usage of 10 minutes, but post 10 minutes, you get charged for the minute. And when you compare it with AWS, so if you have a server which you're maybe like terminating in 5.5 hours, so you'll be charged for 6 hours, you'll be charged for those extra 30 minutes. But if you take the case in Google Cloud, If you use your instance for 5.5 hours, you'll be charged for 5.5 hours, right? So that kind of flexibility is more in your Google Cloud's pricing than in AWS. So if you talk about this domain, the pricing domain, Google has an upper hand than AWS in this. Let's move on to our next domain. So our next domain is the troubleshooting and monitoring domain. So let's see what services are being offered over here. So our first service is the CloudTrail service from AWS, which helps you log your API calls. So once you log your API calls, those calls can actually be traced. And if there's an error in your application, that error can be traced by looking at the log at that specific instance. So that error can be traced by going to the event where it occurred, right? So you have logs according to each and every event. So at the event where the error occurred, you can go to that event and see what error caused the problem. So that is logging is useful. So in terms of AWS, if you want a service which does logging for you, that service is called CloudTrail. And in terms of Google Cloud, that service is called Stackdriver Logging. So basically it's called Stackdriver. Under Stackdriver, you have logging and the monitoring service. So it is called Stackdriver Logging. Our next service is about monitoring. So you have the CloudWatch service. So what happens in CloudWatch services, you can monitor each and every resource in the whole of your AWS account, right? So what kind of traffic is connecting to your instance, how much traffic is there, how are the instances performing, right? Everything can be managed and controlled and monitored via your CloudWatch service. So a similar kind of service in Google Cloud is called Stackdriver Monitoring, which does the exact same things for you. Our next domain talks about the downtime that each of the cloud provider faces, right? So in case of AWS, in 2015, it had a downtime of 2 hours and 30 minutes, right? If you compare it with Google Cloud, so the amount of downtime that Google Cloud faced was 11 hours and 34 minutes, which is huge, guys, when you compare it with AWS. And that is why when you consider the reliability factor, AWS is better right now than Google, because now the reason for this that Google is finding it hard to manage their servers is because they are still new in the industry, right? Like I said, so AWS has a more mature model of infrastructure, and that's how they can manage less downtime, right? So AWS wins over here. Okay guys, so we are done with the comparison between domains. Let's move on to the job trends now. So if we talk about the job trends, so the blue line shows us the job trends for the Google Solution Architect, and the orange line shows us the job trends for the AWS Solution Architect role. So as you can see, there has been a rise for the jobs in AWS. Comparing it with Google, it is still rising, right? Because it's a new service, it's a new cloud provider. So it will take time to rise, but then it will rise in some time. But if you talk about the current scene, AWS has a lot more jobs than your Google Cloud. But that does not mean that Google Cloud does not have the potential, right? It can really happen that in the next 1 year, Google Cloud reaches to the level of AWS, because with the kind of growth and the kind of services that Google Cloud is offering right now, it is actually going to that way. We'll talk about the user experiences. So people use AWS more because you have wide variety of services in case of AWS, and these services can be interrelated as well. But when you talk about Google Cloud, their services are still in the development phase, right? But whatever services that they have launched till date are awesome. Like if they are not even at par with AWS, they are better in some cases. Like I told you the example for Cloud Engine, which is compared with the EC2 service for AWS. So AWS takes around 3 or 4 minutes to launch an instance, but Cloud Engine does that in seconds. It does that in a snap, right? So it's better than AWS in that case. But it'll take time, right? But if we talk about other services, some services are better in case of AWS than Google Cloud, and some services are better for Google Cloud if you compare it with AWS. So there's no clear winner over here. And if you talk about job trends, guys, so obviously since AWS has more market share, it has more jobs right now. But tomorrow, if Google Cloud's market share rises, now there is no guarantee. There is no yes or no for a cloud provider. Google Cloud is the thing right now. Google Cloud is rising, but people are still on AWS because first of all, more mature model of infrastructure, less of downtime, and there's a thing called trust. Since AWS has been there since 2016, it's been 11 years it's been there in this industry. Google is still new. People are skeptical about Google, and hence they are not moving on to the Google platform. So this was about the job trends. So who wins? So like I said, nobody is a winner here. AWS and Google Cloud are winners in their own right. AWS, since it was launched before, has more services to offer, has a more mature model of infrastructure, hence less of downtime, and yet it is still growing every year, right? And Google Cloud Platform, on the other hand, is a new player in the market. It offers excellent services. Some services are even better than AWS, but some, like I said, are better than AWS. And then it has better pricing than AWS. But then I think as and when Google Cloud will grow, it'll have to move on from its pricing, because AWS has to manage a lot, and hence the higher pricing, because it has more features, like I said. So Google Cloud doesn't have that many features as of yet, but it will, like I said, in the near future, because that is how it is growing. So if you were to discuss between AWS and Google Cloud Platform, AWS is a winner as of now, the present time. So if you ask me which cloud provider or which certification to do today, I'll tell you you should do it for AWS. And I'll be biased against AWS because AWS is what I work in, right? So I would prefer AWS anytime. But for you guys who are getting into the cloud industry, it is important to understand that each cloud provider has its own benefits, and you should give the benefit of doubt to Google Cloud Provider as well, because it is new in the market, right? It will take time. But then if you talk about your career, AWS is not going to come down, first of all, because AWS has been growing and will continue to grow, right? Providers like Google and Azure will try to catch on, and it is better to know these cloud providers as well, because if I'm a company and I'm using AWS, right, and tomorrow if I want a backup service to be there as well, because if the whole of AWS goes down, there has to be a backup, right? So if I want a backup, maybe I'll do that on Azure, or maybe I'll do that on Google Cloud. So it depends. And for you guys, it is important to know the other cloud competitors as well, because you are learning AWS as of now. But if you, in the near future, like I said, there is no guarantee, maybe Google Cloud will surpass AWS, right? So you should know about Google as well. So that is the point. So who wins? AWS and Google Cloud Platform are both competitors. They are growing, and it depends on your usage, as in what cloud provider you will choose. So now let's move on and launch instances in AWS and Google Cloud Platform and see what are the difference between the two environments. So this is the AWS dashboard, guys. So we'll be launching an EC2 instance in AWS, and similarly we'll be launching a VM instance in Google Cloud Platform. So first let's launch an EC2 instance in AWS, and we'll click on launch instance, and let's launch an Ubuntu instance. So we'll be selecting a T2.micro instance, which is under the free tier. We'll click on next. We'll leave everything at default and straight away click on review. Once we'll come here, we'll click on launch, and it'll ask us to choose an key pair. So let's do that. Let's create a new key pair and name it as Edureka -demo 1, right? Let's download the key pair. Alright, so I've downloaded the key pair. I'll launch this instance now. Alright, so my instance is now launching. It may take some time, so let us go back to the EC2 dashboard and see the status. So as you can see, I have 3 running instances now. Before I had 2, so that means my instance is now initializing. So this is my new instance, which is still in the initialization phase. So while it is running, let me give you a quick comparison between both the environments. So this is how your Google Cloud Platform dashboard looks like, right? Now to launch a compute instance, you'll click on product and services, and you'll go under the compute engine menu. Once you reach here, you'll have this kind of dialog box. You have to click on create, and you'll be prompted with this screen, right? So this is where you name your instance, and this is the place where you'll be choosing your operating system. So since we launched an Ubuntu instance in AWS, let's choose an Ubuntu instance here as well. So we'll click on Ubuntu here and click on select. Alright, so that is all. There's nothing else to configure. Now we'll click on create, and once we click on create, it will start initializing my compute instance. Now the thing here to notice is, guys, that as you can see, it is still in the initialization phase, right? So let me show you guys how quick Google is when it comes to deploying compute instances. So we'll click on create and it is initializing now. So let's give it some time. Let's check if our EC2 is ready. No, it is still initializing. So as I have observed, Google Cloud Platform is way faster when we compare the deployment time. So if you are deploying an operating system or if you are launching an instance in Google Cloud Platform, it will take much less time when it compared to AWS, right? So as you can see, Google Cloud Platform is ready, right? The Ubuntu instance is ready for you. But if you see EC2, it is still initializing. It takes under 1 minute to launch an instance in Google Cloud Platform, wherein we talk about EC2, it takes around 2 to 3 minutes to launch an operating system. Having said that, what are the other differences when you compare the Google Cloud Platform and AWS is that the way you connect, right? So to connect to an Ubuntu instance in AWS, you actually have to connect through the PuTTY software, right? So you have to SSH your way into the Ubuntu instance. But when we talk about Google Cloud, you have the choice between using Google's own terminal and using your own software, right? So if you're choosing the Google's terminal, you don't even have to manage your public and private key. In case of Ubuntu, like you saw that we had to download our key pair, right? And we have to keep it secure because if you lost that key, we will not be able to connect to that instance anymore. But when we talk about Google Cloud, we have a more sophisticated way to get our way into this instance. So let me show you. So yes, my EC2 instance is launched as well. But then let me first connect to my Google Cloud Platform instance and show you how you can connect to it, right? So we'll click on SSH. And guys, this is it. You get a custom command line in the browser itself, and your account already has the private key, and it auto submits your key and connects you to your instance. Cool, right? So no need of anything. This is, you have successfully logged into your Google Cloud's Ubuntu instance. Right now you can use your commands the way you want to. You can do sudo su and get the super user access. You can type in ls and then it will list all the files which are there in your file system, right? So this is how you connect to a Google Cloud Platform instance. Now, if you want to use your own software, maybe because of some reason, if you want to manage your keys manually, Google has given you an option for that as well. So in that case, what will you be doing is you will have to create your own public private key pair, right? Now let me close this terminal and show you how you can do that. So you will need a software called PuTTyGen for that. So let me launch the PuTTyGen software. Now over here, this is the PuTTyGen software, guys. Now over here, you have to create the public private key pair, right? So you click on generate, you'll drag the mouse here for randomness, and then your key will be created, right? So this is the code to your public key. Now where will you enter this? You actually have to replace the Google's original key and type in this key. You can connect to it. Now for that you have to go back to your Google Cloud dashboard and go to metadata under compute instance. So here you have the metadata option. You'll click on metadata, and over here you'll have the option for SSH keys. You'll click on SSH keys, and here you go. So you have these many keys right now. Now for the key that you want to add, you will select one key that you're sure is not in use and then click on edit, right? So you'll click on that key, remove that key, and then go back to your PuTTyGen and copy everything. Now before copying, you actually have to replace this option, that is the key comment option, with your username. So in my case, my username is HeymanCHT94. So username is basically your Google username, right? So this is my Google username. So I have entered that in key comment. So once I've entered it, now I will select everything from here. I'll copy this and paste it here. Once I've done that, I'll click on save. Alright, so my key has now been saved. Now I'll go back to my VM instances, and now I'll try to connect this instance through the PuTTY software. Now I'll click on save private key, and it'll ask me whether I want to save it without a password, so I'll click on yes. It'll ask me the name for my key, so let's give it the name as Google-Edureka and click on save, right? So my PPK file or my private file has now been saved. So I launch the PuTTY software, and then I'll copy the IP address from here, paste it into this dialog box, click on SSH, click on authentication. Now over here you have to browse to your private key. So my private key is on desktop and it's called Google Edureka. So I'll click on open, click on open again. So you'll get this warning, just click on yes. Now it'll ask you login, as in you have to enter the username for your operating system. So the username is same as that of your Google ID, which is Hemant CH394. Enter that, hit enter, and there you go. So now you are connected to your Ubuntu instance through your own PuTTY software and using the keys which you have given to your Google Cloud, right? Now again, like I told you guys, you can access the super user by typing in this command, cd into whatever folder you want, and that is it, right? You can use your Ubuntu instance as if it was your own. Let's close this. So this is how you connect to an instance in Google Cloud. Now let's compare it with EC2. So with EC2, like I told you guys, once you create it, you'll get a key pair. Now this key pair that you get, or the private file that you get from AWS, is actually in the PEM file format. So before using it to connect to your instance, you actually have to convert it to your PPK, right? Now for that, you have to use the software called PuTTYGen. So this is my PuTTYGen software. I'll click on load. I'll go to downloads. I'll select all files from here. And now my key or my PEM file is called Edureka demo. Here it is, Edureka demo 1.pem. I'll click on open. So it will say that it has successfully imported the foreign key. Click on OK. And now save the private key. Click yes. Save it on desktop. Let me name it as Edureka-demo1 only, right? So I'll click on save. Now as you can see, it will save it in the format PPK. Click on save. Now my key has now been successfully saved. Now I'll have to launch the PuTTY software. This is my PuTTY software. Let me copy the IP address from my Ubuntu instance. So you select your Ubuntu instance. This is your IP address. Copy the IP address, feed it here in your PuTTY software. Go to SSH, click on authentication. Same procedure, guys. Click on browse and then go to your key, which is Edureka demo 1. Click on open. Open again. Click on yes. Now it will again ask you for the username. Now in case of EC2 instances in AWS, for the Ubuntu operating system, the username is by default called Ubuntu, right? You'll enter Ubuntu and hit enter. And as you can see, you have successfully connected to your Ubuntu instance. Now, like I told you guys, you can use the super user as you want. So we'll enter sudo su, right? And then cd into whatever folder you want. So guys, this is the way you connect to an EC2 instance in case of AWS. Now let me recap what I did. So in case of AWS, you get a PEM file which has to be converted to a PPK file, and then only you can connect to the instance that you have launched. Right? In case of Google Cloud, you don't get a key pair in the first place. You can automatically connect through the SSH connection that Google provides you in its own browser window. But then in case you want to manage your own keys, you can do that by creating your own key through the PuTTYGen software. Once you create the key, that key has to be uploaded to the metadata section in the compute engine part over here, right? And you have to go to SSH keys, enter the key here, click and save, come back to your VM instances. then connect it through the putty software that you want to connect it with, right? This is the IP address. Copy this IP address and upload the private key that you'll be saving while you were creating your own key pair, right? The other difference that we noticed is that the launch time in Google Cloud is significantly less as compared to AWS. So if AWS is taking around 2 to 3 minutes to launch your Ubuntu instance, Google Cloud is taking around 30 to 45 seconds to do the same thing. So Google Cloud is faster in that ways. So guys, this was the demo to today's session. So this brings us to the end. If you have any questions, you can put in your chat box right now and I'll be happy to answer it. Any question, guys, in any of the topics that we discussed today? Okay, so since most of you have no questions, okay, so let me wrap up for today's session then. So thank you guys for attending today's session. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed teaching you guys, and I hope you learned something new. For any questions, you can always contact our support team, and I want you guys to try out both the practicals, that is launching an instance in the Google Cloud platform and launching an instance in AWS as well. You'll notice the difference, and that is important, right? I'll not be uploading any assignments officially, but from my side, I'm uploading an assignment for your own knowledge. I won't be checking it. So please complete those assignments and self-evaluate yourself, as in how much knowledge you could grasp today, right? Now, like I said, if you have any queries related to anything technical or non-technical, you can always contact our support team, which is 24/7 available for you guys. And in case your query technical is not solved by the support team, I am always there. You have my email ID in your LMS, right? So you can email me, and whenever I have time, I'll be replying back to you guys, right? So this was it for today's session, guys. See you in the next session. Have a good day.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!